I said, sure, you just got.
Yeah, I said, Randy.
He's talking to the other there's other captains there and the city judge is there. So you don't have to, can't miss a chance to shake a few hands and kiss some babies, so.
But the original vision and this was for it to stay.
Everybody ready?
Nice to meet you.
You ready to get started?
Yeah, I don't know, but that's one of the reasons to move here, so.
What kind of city?
As far as a company.
1995.
I'm done, sorry. I'm sorry. I'm the one talking, just listening.
Jim, you ready?
I don't think it's.
Ready, you got the banger?
Yes, sir. I wish I had. April?
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't know you were ready, just call me to order them, so it's.
Okay.
So sorry.
At least you
All right.
didn't think I.
Number 7.
Elbow.
Meeting number 7, thank you all for coming in on this wonderful hot evening. We're making great progress. Our goal today is go through the second discussion on planning element and review of other content, review number 2. And at this time, I'd like to introduce the mayor, but he's not here yet. So at this point, Melanie, would you take roll?
Absolutely. Chair Roughton,
Here.
Vice Chair Loyal,
Here.
Member Avery,
Here, here.
Member Baker. Here. Member Beatty. Member Boomer Schlegel. Here. Member Boren. Member Clark. Here. Member Clayton. On Zoom. Member Coleman.
Here.
Member Depler.
Here.
Member Helfrey. Here. Member Rubis.
Here.
Member Jackson.
Here.
Member Cohn.
Here.
Council Member McCutcheon.
Here.
Member Metz.
Here.
Member Pick. Member Rambo.
Here.
Member Wren.
Here.
Member Scheiken. And we have a quorum.
All right, thank you.
Yeah.
Vince, would you lead us to the pledge, please?
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible.
Invisible.
Regarding minutes of last month, do we have a motion to approve or any recommended changes? Motion, do I hear a motion to approve as is? Vicky, do we have a second?
I'll second.
Voice vote. Oh,
Discussion.
Teresa, please.
Yeah, I noticed on the, under the roll call, I didn't see Conway and Coleman listed. And I know that, I think Member Coleman had made either a motion or a second or something throughout, so we need to note that Conway and Coleman are the members. And Depler, Helfrey and Rubis are listed as citizen members instead of P and Z because they are from P and Z. So we might want to change that too. And under the planning element goals, My notes indicated that Dr. Rambo has suggested a goal to update the HOA trustees and applicable documents of the HOA on a periodic basis. And if I'm wrong, just point that out to me, but that's what I had in my notes.
Accept the motion with those changes. Give a second. Voice vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you. I'm going to recommend that we follow the same process that we did last month, where Joe walked us through each of the activities. He knows best about what they mean and how to explain them. I think we can save a little bit of time by letting him walk us through, and then we can ask immediate questions and move on. So, Joe, thank you.
Well, first of all, from the Department of Planning's perspective, we'd like to thank you all for attending tonight. Obviously, it's a critical process, and without your participation, we would not make progress. So thank you very much. As we've tried in past meetings, we always want to offer the drinks and snacks, fruits, cookies, coffee, and there's cold drinks in the refrigerator. So don't be that up yourself. I think everyone knows where the restrooms are, but they're out of the community room to the south end of the first floor. So again, this is very informal. If you like something, drink something, eat, and use the facilities. Please don't hesitate. Feel free to. Secondly, when you came in tonight at your chairs, there should have been first that looked like this. And as part of our discussion last month, Ms. Clark and others identified that the city does have a strategic plan. Strategic plan is a 5-year window to what our city council believes are critical goals that need to be met in that time frame. It's a very large document, so tonight we're just kind of giving you the 8 goals that were established by city council and what is described as the sub goals. We will provide you a link to the actual plan and all the other components to it after tonight. And I thought if I gave you the link without the explanation, it might not have the context you need to understand. So these are for all the purposes where we as staff to city council and the different boards and commissions, inclusive of you, basically put on agendas at city council in terms of, impact on budget, strategic goal we're meeting and other information. So this is just another reference tool for you all as we go through this element planning and as we go into the future ones meetings to come. So again, we'll provide you a link to the actual document, which is, as I say, a lot more information in terms of commentary, responsible parties, commentary, etc. And as part of tonight's packet, I also want to just kind of go over the items that you received. Obviously, you know the agenda and minutes are always a component of the packets. Thanks to Ms. Clark for the corrections. I want to make sure that Ms. Ripito and Mr. Newberry got those, so we can address the minutes and ensure that they are correct and a reflection of the last meeting we had. Along with those 2 items, you see 3 things. First and foremost, you have the updated planning element. Say updated because it reflects our discussions on the goals from our last meeting in July, and then as the objective policies that we hope to address tonight. Along with that item, we also again provided you the sheet for community services. We've not got there yet, but that includes all of the goals, objectives, and policies. That is the next element. A new item, so to speak, was something that was described by the department at the last meeting. And that's the proposed narrative, the introduction for the environmental element. So if you're keeping count or track, we've gone through the environmental elements, goals, objectives, and policies. And the other component associated with that update is the narrative. And this is a draft. We received it yesterday. Again, apologize. The only explanation I can give you is that we are extremely busy and trying to keep pace with some of the responsibilities that we can't control, those that we can. Sometimes not a lot is left to get you information as much as I would like. So this is a draft. This is the narrative. The format that the department chose to use is that the new narrative is the left-hand column and the existing narrative is the right-hand column. So you can kind of compare as you read through what we've been using for the last, for the most part, 30 years. Now we're proposing something 10. The intent would be is to have you review the narrative, not tonight, but review the narrative. Have any comments or suggestions or alterations, to send them to Travis and Melanie. Our kind of collection point for your comments. And we'll update that. And then at our meeting in September, we'll be on the agenda item, kind of go through your comments, suggestions, and changes. And for all intents and purposes, if we achieve that September meeting, first element, we'll be done, relatively speaking. You'll always have an opportunity once the elements are all pulled together, associated narratives, to see the final, so to speak, compilation of your efforts and the first draft of the new document. So again, it's up for you. So that's what's in your packet. The objectives and policies. As part of the planning element document, there are the goals. So as you know, at our July meeting, we spent the time we had allotted going through those goals, both the existing and the ends. We have something to identify, and I apologize for it. Goal 2 was what we talked about. It's a Wildwood first. We did a great job kind of explaining, I think, the action of the group. Maybe you can take the goal. So there is no bolded text to indicate what you all directed the department to do, and that is to ensure that Wildwood is a component of it. So you'll see that in the next iteration. My apologies. All the others were accomplished per your direction. And so again, the intent would be, you have any comments or questions, send them to Melanie and Travis. And then we'll work our way through those changes and updates. For all intents and purposes, have those available to you in September as well. I skip over those because again, we spent a great deal. Yes, ma'am.
Wildwood first isn't here. It's on the first page at the very bottom of the action of the group. It's listed on here.
Yes, but the goal itself didn't get updated, which is the far left column. Any of the updates to the goals that were endorsed by the group should be shown in see, some were recommended for no change. Others were recommended for certain modifications to the wording, revisions, and then obviously we have the new ones that you all endorsed. So again, I'm not trying to skip over those, but I am, because we really need to get to the objectives and policies tonight. So with that, Ms. Humphrey.
I'm sorry, Joe. On number 6, it says it's a new one. It says it was left out to meet off. We were going to discuss that this evening.
Yes.
Is this it's a new one, so we're adding this in.
Correct. And that was, again, my apologies. This isn't the well-oiled machine I'd like to think it is. And certainly you're suffering from the workload that the department has at the moment. But yes, number 6, you had the recommended action and you had a discussion that I didn't provide the goal. So tonight, the goal is the first time you're seeing, and it is to institutionalize that no more than a maximum of 10 years shall occur between updates of major plan documents. And then reference the master plan, the action plan for parks and recreation, town center plan, the emergency management plan, which is a group of other goals. And then finally, what we hope to be is the stormwater management master plan. And I just thought of another, it's not yet done, like in this period of the next 10 years, the historic preservation plan.
So essentially, we're doing that now. We're just putting it down in ink, correct?
Yes. Of all the plans, the only one that has a mandate in our charter and state statute is the master plan. All the others could be on a variable schedule. But 10 years seems to be kind of the sweet spot. And this comes more from our initial consultant on the master plan, Jonathan Barnett. 10 years usually allows trends to kind of play out. 10 years also provides predictability. You update the plan too often, you have the predictability that, oh my gosh, they're saying this, but 2 years later, we're saying that. So again, we don't necessarily want to over update, but we don't want to let things go too long because then obviously we might miss opportunities, we might not address challenges, and certainly we want to keep the document.
Thank you so much.
So again, like I say, there's a lot of information and we're doing our best to give it to you in a robust form, accurate form. And obviously, when I miss things, that doesn't help that process, but we'll keep at it. We'll always correct it. We'll tell you where we missed something, so you know what we look at, see why we think that. Any questions? Yes, ma'am.
Would it be a good idea to add this mobility access plan that's in the
Yes.
notebooks?
Yes. For some of you, you all received it at the start of the process, but years ago, we did an access and mobility plan. Really, it is the comprehensive look at how we connect the city minus roadways, so to speak. It's all about trails, sidewalks, pedestrian facilities, for equestrians, hikers, bikers, et cetera, et cetera. And it's a good plan, as Clark identified, because it also shows all of our institutional uses, park properties. And the key thing, and I think it was the first time it had been done, we actually went to all of our other partners in Parks and Trails, the state of Missouri, St. Louis County, Great Rivers Greenway. And we got maps of their trail systems in their individual properties. So we could collectively, instead of just showing the green space, we were able to identify the trails that exist in those facilities as well, which was a real positive step. Because now you can see, oh my gosh, as we found out, there's over 125 miles of trails in the city of Wildwood. And some in state parks, some in county parks, some along the right of ways that the city have done, and some in our park facilities as well. So, good suggestion. Thank you.
So, Ms. Brennan?
Yeah.
Do we have an economic development plan or is Paula going to develop one that maybe we could put in that?
We have a guide. Because it was really just, it was 5 steps that the consultant recommended the city implement. There wasn't necessarily a set of corresponding objectives and policies. There were recommendations. But that is a goal that Lee and Paula Passan are our city administrator, is to basically create an economic development plan that's standalone and for all intents and purposes is treated like every other major document we have. So I'll pencil that in as well. That way it comes to fruition, we're ahead of the game. If it doesn't, in 10 years, the next group can say, oh, we need to strike that. So. All right.
Gonna be here in 10 years.
No, I'll be given how things are going, you won't want me here in 10 years. I can't even update one goal. My gosh, so. All right, objectives. If there are no other questions. So the first objective and the first grouping are the existing objectives that have been part of the plan. First one actually is from 1996. Does not show any updates in 2006 or 2016. All intents and purposes, it talks about preserving the character and ecology of Wildwood. A very simple objective, but one that is key to everything we do. The commentary is, it identifies the unique and difficult natural and built environments of the city's rural areas. Encourages steps to be, for that to be preserved and not changed due to new patterns or development practices or decisions. Recommended action from the department is to retain as is. It's a good objective. It's stood the test of time for the last 30 years. We'd like to keep it that way.
I'll make a motion to retain that. Vicky second. Okay,
I'm
all
sorry,
in favor?
who was the motion?
I made the motion.
Oh, okay, perfect, thank you, sorry.
Vicky second, all in favor? Aye.
Oh. Only Alan can get started here. Perfect, I'm with you now, thank you.
I thought are we doing each one individually?
Well,
I can do it pretty quickly.
yeah,
Go ahead.
But I would just ask, is there any discussion on what was provided to you in terms of the short presentation from the department after the motion and second?
yeah, we'll go ahead and go through all of them and then come back for a vote.
Sounds good. The second objective in an existing, this one was original in 1996, modified in 2016 by the group of volunteers, and it talks about the green belt. And if you're not familiar with the green belt, Lipito and others on the department planning and provided you a map that showed the topography of Wildwood behind Ms. Helpry and Ms. Baker, but it shows that swath that goes from all intents and purposes Merrimack River on the south end of the city to the Missouri River end of the city. Again, I think I talked about this real briefly in an earlier meeting. Probably the catalyst for the formation of the city of Wildwood was an effort first by a group of residents to basically stop the outer belt and save it. And that was approximately around 1986 or 1987. There's a group that had been formed by County Executive Gene McNary, and the county council was called the Pond Grover Community Area Study Group. And they invited the district engineer for the St. Louis area to come to a meeting. And he probably said, we're thinking about doing an outer belt here and it will follow Route 109. Boy, did that get everybody stirred up. So I have nothing like that to offer to you tonight. But yes, so this goal, this objective was key in the incorporation of Wildwood. Obviously, any greenbelt in many ways has been slowly incrementally added to. For example, in Homestead Estates, when that project was approved by City Council, the city received a 90-foot wide corridor from Riga Road to the southern end of the development site. That corridor was intended for actually will connect Babbler State Park down to Route 100, and from Route 100 then down into Rockwood's Reservation. So incrementally, we have been attempting to add to the greenbelt as projects come forward or positions become available. The intent of the greenbelt obviously is for recreational purposes, but I also remind you, back in 1996, it was about a wildlife corridor, an area for wildlife to basically migrate. And then also the greenbelt is, as one of the original Planning and Zoning Commission members, described John Guthill, the lungs of the metropolitan area, because it is heavily wooded and treed. The department is recommending that it be retained, but better define the transitional landscapes and connectivity considering adding rural properties to it. It is a slender corridor, and I think there are some opportunities. So retain but revise. Any questions or comments? Yes, ma'am.
So it just occurred to me, because a lot of the things that I follow on social media are regarding, wildlife management and stuff like that. And there's a lot of popularity coming from, wildlife corridors over interstates and highways. Has there been any discussion about having something like that over, Highway 100 or anything?
There is a individual lady that attends via Zoom, typically the coffees with the mayor. Consistent comment that Travis and I see, as well as Mayor Garitano, is something identical to that. In that we have crossings in the park areas that have high rates of deer car
Right.
or deer vehicle incidents. So that's something that I think, in the context of what he provided as commentary, we'd like to explore and get back to. And that would be potentially the objective, but that would be the policy. That would be the objective.
Yeah, I didn't know, I haven't been privy to any conversations in the Wildwood area, but I think the benefit for, traffic incidents is high, and I also think it would make Wildwood stand out in the region, having something like that as well.
Well, if there's no objection on the part of the group members, we'll explore that and come back with more direction, and we'll get to that particular item. Certainly, if you drive those two arterial state corridors, you do see a lot of deer and other wildlife that didn't quite make it across in as gently as possible. Other questions on the green belt? The next, please.
Yeah, well, mine's just more of a clarification for myself, where it says the recommended action, U.S. wildlife benefits, climate improvements, recreational needs and aesthetic enhancements. Are we gonna put specifics in for one of those? Are all of them? Are we just gonna leave them general?
If we do specifics, I would suggest we consider those in the policies.
Okay.
And if you have suggestions when we get to the policies, please let us know, and we'll write them down and do the research, and then return to you in September with our findings.
Thank you.
You're welcome, ma'am. The next relates to our land use components. So behind Ms. Blumer-Schlegel is the master plan land use map. And it's a great map because it's really quite simple. There are approximately, specifically, 4 land use categories. There's the non-urban residential area, there's the suburban residential area, town center. And at the very northern tip of the city, there is the Wildwood portion of the Chesterfield Valley. We say roughly and approximately, you won't see it necessarily on there, but there is a 5th land use category. It's called historic. And what we discovered between 1995 and 2006 is that, unbeknownst to the incorporators, the initial elected appointed councils, is that there were a number of properties that had been developed that did not necessarily have supporting zoning. And some of those occurred back in the 1970s, 1980s, 1990s. And what we found is many of them were in historic communities like Grover and Pond, or in historic buildings. So the intent was, instead of just saying you had to vacate those, the intent was for purposes of historic preservation, is to allow them to be retained, but under the category of historic preservation, meaning the residence, the structure, the building, the land had to be preserved through our historic preservation and the components associated with it. So saying all of that, that's the 5th category. It's not mapped on the map itself, so to speak. That's why it's a little slide with roughly and approximately. So the suburban is the orange color. And for all intents and purposes, that was the area that St. Louis County had been developing from the period of time from the late 1970s to the incorporation. So those two areas separated by the eastern tip of town center are all the traditional subdivisions, Harbors of Lake Chesterfield, winding trails, Point Clayton, all of those that many of our residents call home. And so there were, at the inception of the city, large parcels of ground that still existed. But those parcels of ground over the course of the last 30 years have been developed. And those include Wide Cliff, Windcrest Addition, Woodcliff Heights. So as we talk today, there are probably just a handful of properties that remain in the suburban residential area that are what I would consider suitable for development. So this particular objective says that the expansion of suburban type densities should be limited to those locations and parcels of ground identified on the map. And I've given you explanation why there are two of them because of past development decisions of St. Louis County and the reasonableness of our process when we develop the master plan, in that if you're surrounded on four sides by suburban densities, it makes no sense to say you should be non-urban, nor does it make sense to say you should be town center and have high density next to a cluster pattern. So the department basically is sold and retained. It's worked pretty well. The key component of it is, I don't know if you've noticed, but subdivisions like Oak Ridge Trails, Garden Valley Farms, West Hampton Woods, Crown Point Estates, they were not included. Those were considered outliers, and that if they were included, what would inevitably happen is their borders would create a suburban border, and then that properties next to them would be able to claim, well, it's right here, why can't I be suburban instead of non-urban? And so we drew the lines where we thought it was reasonable, generally speaking, where road systems were better. All utilities were available, including internet. And from the perspective of the group that did the original master plan, we didn't want that spread or that creep to occur. So retain as it. Any questions? Following along with Teresa.
Just a note on this one, as well as back on goal 6 with all the list of the plans, maybe put links to each one of these documents. This one, the conceptual land use category map.
Certainly, that's easy. Thank you. Glad to do it. Other questions on objective 3? Okay. Objective 4, another existing. This relates to commercial and industrial development. You will be surprised that we do have an industrial area, as I mentioned earlier. And that's the Wildwood portion of the Chesterfield Valley. It's about 450 acres or so. If you've gone to Fix Supply Service, you've been in our industrial area, city of Wildwood. So commercial and industrial development should be promoted because it does provide adequate tax and service base for its citizens, and it should be strictly limited to town center and Chesterfield Valley. The department is recommending change.
Just out of curiosity, how much of that is, of the 400 acres, how much is now industrial? And how much is available?
Well,
Approximately.
I would say of that 450 acres, there's probably about 300 that's available for development. So a couple of things. much of the area that Wildwood has jurisdiction over, we've actually done industrial uses and approvals of those uses. Fixed supply service, Kurtz Landscaping, Combined Services, Dowco, recently updated the badge plan Instra. So contrary to what you see across North Etherton Road in the Chesterfield portion of the valley, they do retail, they do service, they do recreational. We've actually kind of stuck to our master plan and approved industrial type activities. You see, I've been by fixed supply service, the mounds and mounds of compost that he generates, manufactures there. When we get to the conceptual land use categories map, we have two letters, one from a home builder and one from the owner of 235 acres of that Chesterfield, of the Wildwood portion of Chesterfield Valley, seeking to have a little more flexibility with land use types. And so we'll be talking about that in a little bit. But for tonight's purposes in this objective, we don't want to expand industrial beyond where it is. And certainly town center at 800 plus acres, as Mayor Garitano likes to describe, is an area where a different group updates that specific plan about 2 years from now. So, but you have the authority when we get to that particular area in terms of land use map, land use and the land use map to expand it if you should choose. But this is not what we're asking tonight. This is just saying industrial and commercial is limited to those two categories. And the department is recommending for retain. That's it.
Please.
So what do we do with the businesses over at Clayton and Strucker and Stovall's and the gas station at one on Creek? What are those considered?
Those are legal nonconformities. And so in 1997, all of the properties at Clayton and Strucker Road, they were all rezoned by the city. And we modified the master plan to reflect that they were pre-existing, non-conforming, but legal. Same was done for the gas station at Route 109 and Wild Horse Creek Road. Others, like the Glencoe Post Office, which was a C1 neighborhood shopping district designation, we basically just have not amended the plan because it's the federal government. And so the thought was, why chapel and giant when you don't need to? So we recognize we have some outliers. We tried to address them through the rezoning process to ensure they didn't become more intrusive relative to the land use policies of the city. And we modified the plan to address it.
Thank you.
Any other questions on number 4? Number 5, which is obviously not numbered, and it's the next one at the top of page 4. Programs to improve communication about and enforcement of planning and zoning regulations. This is code knowledge and enforcement. And a lot of people we hear, I didn't know. Since the last update, we've hired an economic development manager that was also, for all intents and purposes, our communications manager. So over the last 10 years, we've been trying to address this. We now, with Paula Bassan, have someone that's more focused on communications versus economic development. As our city administrator used to be the economic development manager. So they pair well and work closely together. From the department's perspective, we'd like to retain this and more align it to what we've been doing over the last 10 years versus what we thought we would do when we engaged the first economic development manager, communications person. So we've evolved, we've matured, and I think we're on the right path. So we'd like to revise but retain. Questions on that? goal 5, which is actually 6, my apologies. The city should continue to encourage life cycle housing opportunities for all age groups. This has been a goal since 2006. Again, it speaks to the fact that we, as the city, could offer a range of housing types and affordability. As you know, affordability is a challenge these days in Wildwood. And so we often hear from different individuals, whether it's younger adults, empty nesters, seniors, those that are one-person households, so no, excuse me, people that children, and one adult, one person. And so they struggle to find housing options that suit their needs in an affordable manner. It's probably one of the objectives we've not achieved very well. Oftentimes, one of the questions we hear is, well, what's the starting price on those homes? And most people, the reaction is when they say 500,000 to $1 million, like that versus not liking it. Again, understand the reaction because it helps stabilize and improve existing property values when more expensive housing is built, because obviously the opportunity to increase the value of your house follows. But like I say, I can name a couple of people, I won't, who did that they wanted desperately to stay in Wildwood, in Owensville and Chesterfield, because they have different housing options that fit their particular time of life. So what the department is recommending is retain and add a reference that affordability is a challenge. You should recognize it.
Have we done any research to obtain any data as to what affordability would actually mean? Do we have a range or?
Actually, Tom Lee is working on something along those lines. He may be into this meeting a little bit later, but certainly we can respond to that question at the meeting in September and let you know what exploration we've done, the initial results we have.
Thank you.
Yes.
But we were talking about affordable housing before, and maybe this is what you mean by reference, but what would we consider affordable housing?
Well, I think there's standards that have been promulgated by the federal and state governments, because the federal government, obviously, through our community development block grant program, we have to basically agree to provide affordability in the housing choices we provide. I can't say, I'm not an expert on it. So both Ms. McCutcheon and your questions are very good. Wish I had a good answer, but we'll get you the answer. So it may be segregated on age. It may be segregated, obviously, on income. I would defer to the other 3 planners in the room. If you know more than me, I'd sure like some help right now.
So it doesn't necessarily mean to own.
No, that's a very good point. A lot of the conversation about the new apartment complex at Main Street and Taylor Road has been about offering an affordable option somewhere between $1,500 to $2,000 a month for people that I've described, young professionals starting out, seniors, empty nesters. What we're seeing a lot of, and I'm told this quite a bit in conversations with people that live on 3+ acres as they age in place, again, don't want to leave Wildwood, but they just don't desire having the large home in 3 acres or more to maintain. We really struggle to kind of point them in a direction. We've had some success. Windsor Crest, that was what I would consider affordable housing when it was offered in the late 1990s. It was at a starting price of $300,000. The Canterbury development, not the townhomes that started it, but when McBride Homes came in to complete it during the recession, those were in the $200,000 starting range. So relatively speaking, affordable by prices that we're seeing today. Ms. Ripito, Mr. Newberry, Ms. Keefe, and I, basically, we're attending meetings, planning and zoning commission meetings, et cetera, and we're hearing most of the new projects are in excess of $1 million right now. Starting home prices. Yes, sir.
It's likely, just from your land use, that anything that would be considered affordable, new housing stock would be in town center, correct?
You bet.
And there's only certain areas within town center that could accommodate it. I know that the city will oftentimes seek and solicit commercial opportunities. Have we, it seems like we got the apartment component in good shape right now, especially with the new ones once they get going. Has the city ever, let's use the landmass along Crestview Drive just as a landmass, and apparently you have people there that would love to move out of there. The city brokers perhaps not a good word, but facilitate, hey, we'd like villas, go to villa construction people. So the city initiate efforts to create the housing stock versus waiting for a developer to come in.
Maybe Ms. McCutcheon, Dr. Rambo, or the mayor might want to comment, but what I will tell you is, at least from the Department of Planning, we're reactive. Some company comes to us.
Right.
And we try to discuss the components of all of our regulations. And I would probably tell you affordability is the last one, because from our perspective, if we don't have an established policy or something in terms of a regulation, oftentimes when you talk affordability, some might feel that you're talking discrimination, because affordability is a characteristic that was used in the past to keep certain certain races out of different areas.
I'm just saying, if we want a certain kind of housing, maybe we should seek out someone to build that.
I think the challenge with that is the existing homeowner is gonna win in what money they can for their property. And if we go in and say, okay, we want $200,000 apartments there, then the yield on that property is gonna be X. Or if they sell to a builder, the yield on the property could be 10X. And I think that's the challenge.
I think you've described the tension we face. Existing homeowners concerned about the development itself and the impact on the environment, but also what is the asking price, and is the asking price less than what I paid for my home? And that's a problem. And so there's a tension there. I think the way to address the tension.
Before you.
Sure.
So if we haven't done this in 10 years, what makes us think we're going to do it in the next 10?
Well, that's an interesting question, and I think I might have a partial response. Mr. Newberry and I have been talking to an individual who wants us to consider a tiny home community, meaning homes that are somewhat very small, usually on slab, at a greater density, but they are single-family detached dwelling. And there's been success across the country with some of them. The person we've talked to referenced a situation where a divorce, 2 kids. They're in an apartment right now. They're trying to stay in the Rockwood School District, but they would love to have something they could call their home.
Okay, so staff does believe there is opportunities to accomplish this.
And within town center.
Okay.
Because not all town center sites may necessarily lend themselves to a traditional footprint of a single family detached dwelling. 8-9 foot 4 basement, 3 bedrooms, 3 baths, that kind of thing. So in town center, I still like to believe we have some flexibility in terms of offering something a little unusual, but certainly something that someone owns and appreciates as much as any of us that have different types of housing.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, with regard to the inquiry about tiny homes, I have available in the downtown area, roughly 4 acres of land. And I would seriously consider a joint venture with someone like that, which would at a minimum offset the requirement of buying the land. Because as I have learned, most of the landowners who want to sell their property to new developers have a valuation that is totally unrealistic. But if you can take into consideration someone who's owned the property for maybe 40 years and is maybe able to develop part of the original tract of such things as maybe a movie theater or a shopping center, the ability to move a project like that forward becomes much more feasible than from someone starting from scratch.
Well, not to tip our cards very much, but when I was talking to this individual, the fact that McKelvey Homes had to pull off that particular 4-acre site because of the depth of bedrock being so shallow, most tiny home communities are flat. So
That was part of the impetus of my response.
A couple things. I've heard some talk about allowing, what did you call that? Like the accessible, renting an accessible unit on your home, your property?
Secondary auxiliary.
That auxiliary, yeah,
Structure or-
auxiliary structure. That would too, might give some flexibility. But also, I was reading on H Bill 595 just passed recently, and even before that, there were a lot of laws about this, but that it's you can't refuse to rent or lease a single or multi-unit residential or commercial properties due to their source of income. So if somebody has gets so much money from the government, whatever it's from, they can use that as a housing voucher or something. You can't refuse, and that it even added, this last bill added no restrictions on, you can't use credit reports, credit scores, evictions, or criminal history to determine eligibility. So that would open up apartments to,
Is this bill passed?
Bad people.
it was passed, I think, in June.
And what was the name of
June or
it?
July, 595, HB 595.
And you're saying it's federal?
Yeah, it's federal. No, it's Missouri.
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 Okay,
The federal laws have already been there, but
yeah, I was starting to.
the Missouri law.
No, again, as I mentioned, when we talk about projects, particularly residential projects, regardless if it's town center or elsewhere, we don't talk about necessarily income levels, housing prices. In fact, we stay away from that. We use the regulations in the code relative to environmental components, infrastructure, utility, all the things that we feel guarantee that the property, the environment is protected. There's adequate access into and out of the site, safe. And it has the utility network that we use to basically live in the United States of America in 2025, which is now high-speed internet, as well as electric, water, gas, and everything else. So we're guilty in some regards in ensuring that we have adequate utilities, safe and appropriate infrastructure, protections to the environment, public space, stormwater management. We add costs to all projects. But we add reasonable costs because those are the things you must have. And have the tenements of New York City from the 1920s. We've learned from those mistakes, and we make sure that housing is safe and appropriate. So, Mrs. Humphrey, sorry.
So this number 6 here, I'm all good with everything you're saying, except that the only thing that I would say is, I don't know that I would put in affordability. I might put something in there to the reference the safe, and lifestyle cycle housing. Because I think when you put in affordability, you open up a can of worms. That is such a relative term. Affordable to who?
Mhm.
Right? And if Wildwood is a desirable place to live, the houses and the apartments and everything is gonna be more expensive out here than it is in a community where maybe it's not as desirable to live. So I think if it were my opinion, I would not put the word affordability in there because I think you just, it opens us up to a host of what ifs. Huh?
We can't control.
Right, we can't control affordability. We can afford quality, we can control safety, but we can't control affordability. That's a market-driven parameter. So that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Well, certainly there should be conversation about that because as we move down the list, there's also a new goal about creating a housing affordability index, something to help us guide decisions. Some communities and researched in the past, they require certain developments to set aside affordable units based upon federal standards or state standards. We've never done that. We had conversations with a couple of developers early on in the city, but they explained the parameters that prohibited it. And certainly when it came to then the Planning and Zoning Commission, they concurred with those parameters. So I think if affordability isn't a component that you want as an objective and then corresponding policies, we need to make that decision properly sooner than later.
Okay, then let me follow up and say that it's not that I'm against affordability. That's not what I'm saying. And so I want that to be clear right now. I in front of Planning and Zoning, we had a woman who came to us about maybe a year ago who said, you know, my child graduated college and wanted to move back here and couldn't afford to buy a house. So I believe that the life cycles approach is the way to go. But I think that when you start trying to put pricing or affordability parameters on things, then you affect someone's ability to sell their property for a certain amount of money, or you affect a builder's ability to build a type of a house or a quality of house or a number of house or apartment or condo that they want to build. I think that, and we're not giving them money, that maybe they're applying for federal grants to build their property or their state grants to build their property. So let them meet their parameters for affordability. But I think that we should not do that. I think that I think that that's too many controls and it's something that how can you manage that? How can you maintain that? That's me. So go ahead.
I'd just like to respond from the
Please.
planning perspective. I think what you're describing is one approach to affordability. And the other approach is encouraging things like tiny homes, accessory dwelling units, missing middle housing through a variety of zoning measures, development standards, incentives, things of that nature, to where you're not trying to control like what income can purchase a certain home or rent a certain apartment, but where you're trying to encourage certain housing types that would in effect, you know, result in more affordable housing and more diverse housing types in the community. And really housing, and you're right, it is very relative. And typically when a community approaches something like affordable housing, you start with a pretty in-depth study, just like you would for economic development. You do a market study. Generally you would start with a housing affordability study where you kind of determine based on your community's characteristics and economics and social, all of those factors, you know, what would be the most appropriate mechanisms for encouraging affordability. So I just want to make sure you understand that when we're talking about affordable housing, we're not necessarily saying, you know, we're not necessarily talking about putting controls on incomes for, you know.
I don't think that. I think that we're trying to put controls on the people that are building or selling their property to be built on. That's what I think it finally comes down to. I agree with everything you're saying. And I liked what you said about diverse developments. I think that that's great. And I think that you can encourage that without regulating that. I think that sometimes we can overregulate, so I think that it's great that we have the idea of the tiny housing. I'm a big fan of barn dominiums, if anybody cares, but that's my goal house. Anyway, I think that that's good, and I think that you can encourage without regulating. And Vicky is of the mindset, less regulation sometimes is better, so.
So
Thank you.
again, I just want to point out that just like in the city of Wildwood, we have a voluntary historic preservation program, like where we're incentivizing and partnering and programming to achieve our historic preservation goals as a city rather than regulating and controlling. The same thing can be implemented for affordable housing. For example, previously I was a planner with the city of St. Petersburg, and we had a pretty strong affordable housing program. It was very much, kind of at the top of our priority list for the entire time I was planning there. But it was a voluntary program. So it was all about incentivizing certain developments. It was removing barriers for certain developments, because a lot of times that's what the problem is. It's not so much that we're needing to control, it's that we're needing to, okay, well, in order to bring these types of, these diverse housing types to Wildwood, what barriers are in our zoning code to achieving that?
And can you give me an example of what one of those barriers would be, just so that I understand?
So for example, like with missing middle housing types, and for those of you who don't know missing middle is about low scale multifamily housing. So like duplexes, quadruplexes, courtyard developments. You see some of these housing types in the city of St. Louis. But as we were trying to achieve that in St. Petersburg, what we realized was that our zoning really just supported that single family dwelling on the lot. So it was harder to come up with these creative, land use patterns. And so we started looking at our arterial roadways and how we could potentially change our zoning to allow for these different housing types. For accessory dwelling units, we had to do a lending analysis, because it turned out that just because we allowed accessory dwelling units in our code didn't mean that lenders felt comfortable financing such units based on certain factors. And how could we as the city remove some of those barriers to work with lenders to facilitate these types of developments? So it's kind of a complicated topic.
Right.
But that's generally, when I think of affordable housing, there's a lot of different pathways to go, and it's not necessarily about what can we regulate, it's about how can we potentially remove some of these barriers, and how can we make this a goal to strive towards.
Thank you for explaining that to me. I appreciate it.
Mr. Otten, you've been waiting for a bit, I know.
So I think defining that number is kind of the problem. And Vince just showed some very good information. HUD defines affordable housing as 30% of income. Well, I don't think that's what we're talking about realistically. It just doesn't work. So if we go with that, I think our objective should be that our planning commission focus on creative opportunities to drive, to Robin's point, to drive alternatives. We're never going to get to $500 a month apartments, but we can focus our city activity on maybe coming up with different zoning rules and so on and so forth to keep that price down and still support Wildwood.
Hearing this conversation, influenced a lot by what Vicky is saying. And, I think when I hear about housing affordability index, I think of usually big metropolitan cities that implement these types of measures and tools. So my first reaction is, I don't know that Wildwood is at that stage yet for even to consider it, or will it ever? But the other part is really, I think naturally, we already are doing that through our land use plan. Because the town center, if you're gonna look for, let's say, affordable housing options, the town center allows for a higher density, which would bring that to reality a lot more than trying to find that out in Ward 6 somewhere. And I think the other factor is supply and demand, so therefore there's more supply in the town center, there's more potential supply in the town center, it's not there yet. So, you know, we have to get even people to be interested in developing something in the town center. So, you know, that's, I think, what is gonna really drive what the pricing is the supply and demand. And being that Wildwood is the last frontier of St. Louis County where you can get a 3 or large acre parcel of land, I don't know that those pieces of land will ever come down because they are a unique find in the region. So I think we already take care of it through our land use plan, is what I really want to say. So I don't think we need that at this time.
Can I just say one more thing following up on Robin? I like what you said. And I think that the next time that we go through the land use, the town center update thing, that I think that whatever that is in 7 years, maybe, I think that that would be the time to implement or and to do some of those things that you're stating because of the other things that are required. I don't think it's a bad idea, but I think it's more of a planning and zoning and working in the town center. It seems to me, that's just my thought, but thanks for explaining everything you did. I truly
Teresa, we
appreciate
got
that.
hopped over.
No, you know, thinking about what Robin said and from a planning standpoint, the housing affordability index, going through that, will pull out all of those things you were talking about. Where would we need it? What can we do in the different areas? Should we do it in the town center only? All of this will come out in your planning part of that housing affordability index. And then in the other one, you know, Vicky, your discussion on that objective, I think maybe we could even change the wording a bit to just say something like diversified demographics, so that it covers the whole gamut, the age and economics. So we're not pointing fingers at one or the other. Because we do want that. We want inclusion. We want some diversity in Wildwood. I used to go to North St. Louis and do and just do homework with kids in high school there. And these kids are all Black. Most of my family's Black, but they were all like, oh, Wildwood, that's the whitest city around. And I'm like, what? No. And so then I start looking at the demographics and I'm like embarrassed because we kind of are.
Nellie used to be my neighbor. He wanted to be, but did he ever finish? He was there for a little while.
My point is that, you know, and when I was talking about, on the council, talking about the changing of the old Slave Road to Madison Valley, and got a lot of looks when I would say, Blacks, or, you know, like, oh, you know, don't talk about that. To me, it doesn't mean anything different because that's my family, right? But my nephew told me, Aunt Teresa, just remember, you are just another white face up there on that panel. And he said, all of you look alike to a lot of people around. So, you know, we need some diversity.
Well, so I wrote something down. I was just listening to everyone because affordability, I want you to think about the term affordability. I agree with you. First thing he did, he went and looked at HUD. Then we talked about big major city demographics. And now we're into whatever else. And as Robin pointed out, affordability could be a family dwelling. It could be all these different things. So I actually kind of wrote something down. I don't like the word affordability too, because it immediately takes you down to low income housing, no matter what anyone's the intent. So I don't know, I just threw something out there, develop diverse housing options across the socioeconomic spectrum. That would be your goal. And then that is open to everyone. Here you go, Joe. And then it takes affordability out and we don't go to the lowest denominator here, right? And we're thinking about all the different, the families, the apartments that someone doesn't wanna, their kid couldn't come back and they want $1,200 apartment, whatever it is. So anyway, my 2 cents.
We should have just let you do this.
What's that?
I said we should have just let you do this.
I'm from Ripley County. It was the 3rd poorest county or parish in the United States for a long time. And now it's out of the top 10. It's like 15, but it used to be in the top 3.
That's good compromise.
I've seen poor.
I like that. I think that means what we're trying to accomplish, yeah.
Yeah, I
Without
agree too.
jump.
Cindy, did you have something to add?
No, I think I was down the same path.
So just to kind of bring discussion to, let's say, a little bit of closure, in town center, Andres Duani and his team was here. We did add a number of options relative to housing. Town center plan allows accessory dwellings. It allows 2 dwellings on the same lot. Nowhere else in Wildwood would that occur. We basically advocated for live-work units, which would have commercial on 1st floor, ownership or renters on the 2nd, 3rd floor. All of those things that we've talked about in terms of housing options, they're already in our town center plan, and they've been retained through 2 updates. Problem is, and we were told this very early on from the development community, housing in St. Louis is very conservative, and nobody's probably going to basically support live-work units. Accessory dwellings probably aren't going to be very popular. For the most part, they were correct. If you go to Newtown, Whitaker Homes built a number of buildings for live-work uses. They're all residential now. It's just, like I say, it's just a struggle. I'm not saying it's impossible, but the things we started with are not the things we've seen occur, are the type of housing that the development community is proposing in the city.
How much land is available in town center now that's open for development?
I'd say town center, the absorption rate of developable land is probably now about 50%.
50%?
So less than 400 acres. And those are individual properties or collections of small properties. There's no longer the large tracts of land that we started with. With the reserve, the last large tract of land, 50 acres has been.
So the McBride development that they chose not to go, what were they talking about as far as their home prices?
They were in that $400,000 range, as I recall, for a starter. But again, the response from the residents in Cambry, Main Street Crossing, and Atherton Road was they're too small, there's not enough parking, there's this, there's that. Ultimately, as we tried to address those concerns, adding additional parking, garages, things like that, the cost started to escalate.
Yeah.
Affordability, life cycle housing. So I think the conclusion was, Mr. Jackson, I think the group would like to explore your wording.
The Jackson plan.
About the Jackson plan.
Jackson plan.
There you go. All right, well, we've got our marching orders. We'll see what we can do.
Okay.
Number 6, which is actually number 7, the town center area of Wildwood. Application of its required neighborhood design standards and architectural guidelines shall be met or exceeded by development interest. This came in 2016, and we were in a bit of a struggle at that time because a lot of our standards and guidelines weren't being applied, not for any reason of city council or the mayor. It was just that it was out of the recession. The recession really didn't end here until about 2013, 2014, meaning that's when interest in development finally started to reappear. And so there was let's say an inclination on the part of others to basically move forward and not necessarily have rear entry or side entry garages, not necessarily have party board siding, vinyl, things like that. And so the group that was updating the plan then wanted to emphasize the first, let's say, 18 years of town center, investments were made by developers to do what we asked. And if we didn't continue that, we were basically disinvesting and causing those individuals that followed the rules feel like, well, why did I? So that's the rationale. The department is recommending that it be revised or enhanced, and that we basically talk a little bit more instead of just guidelines and standards about pedestrian-friendly improvements, quality public spaces, along with always continuing to advocate for superior materials. Superior materials mean expense, but I always tell people better materials last longer and there's less maintenance. So there's a cost savings down the road, maybe not immediately. So, any questions on that one? Guess what I'm saying is there's always been a group of advocates for state and cores in the town center.
Continuity.
Thank you. Good work. Continuity. The next two are new. One is create a set of reasonable housing goals, along with forming a housing affordability index. I think we've kind of covered that, and we'll see if we can combine that with what we've just talked about over the last 15 minutes or so. And then the last one is new as well. Adopt and implement the city's historic preservation plan. Corresponds with our goal of enhancing our built and natural environments.
Sure.
Yes, sir.
Would that include any more teeth to preservation? I mean,
Everything's volunteer now, pretty much.
yeah, would there, I mean, or would it could we come up with and have that implemented as a little more pressure?
City control.
So I'll let Robin respond here just in a second. So when the first historic preservation and restoration code was being considered, there was a backlash from the community in terms of the extent of regulation that they were now experiencing. Remember, they went from St. Louis County with no grading code, no tree preservation and restoration code, no real master plan for the area, and dense development decisions relative to zoning district designations that were irrespective of the natural characteristics of the site. Wildwood comes along, we've got a grading code, tree preservation and restoration code, floodplain management requirements, master plan, natural resource protection standards, et cetera, et cetera. And so people that were on that next tier of development, let's say west of Route 109, saw their dreams go up in smoke. And so now we're going to step in and say we're going to have a mandatory historic preservation program. And the mayor and the city council said, no, we're not. We need to take a breather. In 2014, when we did the first major update to our historic preservation and restoration code, that was the first question the department asked the group, Historic Preservation Commission members. Do you want to consider something that isn't entirely voluntary? The action from the commission, those in attendance at the meeting, was very, very negative of going anywhere but voluntary. So saying that, we stayed the course. But that is a question that was going to be asked when we get to that particular policy. Do we want to consider something? And Robin's what got more of the pulse of the community on historic preservation. And what's your opinion? Would they accept something other than voluntary?
I get the sense from this, I feel like this community definitely leans towards voluntary approaches on most matters. We just got done having a debate over the housing question, and I would say most would appreciate a more voluntary approach to it than a regulatory one. I would say that Wildwood does have some teeth in that we have a pretty strong demolition delay built into our ordinance, in terms of, you know, there's a review process that goes anytime there's a substantial alteration or proposed demolition of a historic structure. It has to come before the Historic Preservation Commission. A site visit must be conducted. There's opportunities to potentially delay decisions another 30 days. And so I've seen communities implement that as kind of at least an opportunity to talk before things get lost. And I think potentially we're going to have a win in terms of the JP Connell House. Unfortunately, we did not have a win in terms of the Mary Cliff residence, which was recently demolished, and that was a really sad loss for the preservation community. So I mean, again, I think this is just another complex question that really comes down to where is the community at with it? I do think you can achieve great things in a voluntary fashion. I think when you can partner, when you can incentivize, when you can invest public funds into a public good, like we have been doing with our historic preservation program, I think you can achieve quite a lot. But preservation, whether regulatory or mandatory or voluntary, no matter which way you go, I guarantee you, you're going to have, you know, some sad losses. You're going to have some wins. I think the regulatory approach is typically more controversial.
Well, I wasn't thinking so much as regulatory as what I was not aware that we could offer public funds for preservation.
Well, we don't.
Yeah.
Grants or something.
Here's what we do. We offer incentives. So you preserve. A great example is developer named Mike McNerney purchased a property in the River Bend subdivision off of Persimmon Lane. It was the River Craig House. It was constructed by a riverboat captain. It has this widow walk that looks out across the river into the Crescent Valley. It also has pretty verifiable haunted history. So,
Is that up 109? Is that up 109?
off of Route 109, but down by the boundary with the city of Eureka. It's a wonderful residence. His first step was, I have X amount of acres, I can do 4 lots. One of those lots isn't gonna be where the River Craig mansion is located. The Historic Preservation Commission, then the City Council agreed that we'd waive some of the requirements relative to lot dimensions, lot sizes, if he would save River Craig. So where there was to be only 4, there's now 5. And River Craig still stands today. So we offer zoning subdivision incentives, not outright payments. And we don't have a property tax to waive. That's what some communities do.
Yeah,
They do
that's-
benefits to tax. Now, Robin's explored, and we offer as part of the commission's services, information and access gains with state and federal tax benefits do exist. And so there is a benefit of getting on our register than going to the federal registry, because then you can realize benefits to your tax bill. So.
We are considering a Route 66 grant program, and that's probably our first foray into offering public funds for historic preservation efforts. However, that's still in development and still needs to go through the rest of the process.
But that program, like community development block grants, they have a home improvement program. There'll be some requirements that maybe not everybody will accept. For example, with the home improvement program, you have to agree to live in the house 5 years after the grant is awarded. Again, you're improving your house, we hope you stay. In the case of Route 66 and some of the businesses, maybe it's, you know, if you do this, you get this. It's also just signage for businesses, acknowledging Route 66 and their location on it. We've got, the commission's done a very good job of creating some options that hopefully we feel that the grants will be minimal relative to cost today, about anywhere from $5,000 to $10,000. But quite frankly, we like to think it's enough to kind of push the revitalization of Route 66, which our Historic Preservation Commission and Robin and others have been working very hard for. So, yes.
We got through goals, we got through objectives. I'd like to propose a motion. It doesn't look like we're gonna make it all the way through policy today. So I'd like to propose a motion that we accept the goals, we accept the objectives as is with the changes noted. So we can lock them in place before we start on policies. Do I have a second?
Does that include the verbiage of?
Yes.
Scott's. So one thing, if I may, Mr. Chair. I always leave a little few lines blank that say new, but nothing next to them. I'm counting on your creative genius collectively as a group and individuals to tell us, did we miss something? Is there something new out there in terms of objectives that correspond to the goals that you identified and discussed that we need to include? So this is the time, I think, for that discussion before we move to the two.
And maybe this, I should have said something about a goal previously, but I was just thinking about accessibility needs. And should we add something in for counting that in from the very get-go, the very initiation of any project that we budget in for accessibility for physical spaces, as well as there's a lot of digital accessibility that's coming up in even in ADA. But
So,
above ADA.
yes, so we, as the city, follow Americans with Disability Act requirements. St. Louis County, our partner through the building plan, building code review processes, complements that. But what we're finding is we still fall short in a lot of regards because ADA doesn't go necessarily as far as some of our residents want us to. So, for example, through the efforts of Ms. Clark, we now have interpreters at our concerts for those that are deaf. We also have moved toward more requirements relative to accessibility in terms of our trail systems and construction standards, things along those lines. So yes, that's a glaring miss on my part. So thank you. I think accessibility and then moving into our master plan would be a worthwhile goal, objective, and policy for all.
Would that fit into the number 7 within the town center? I mean, could you add that to the back end of that town?
Certainly could.
Number 7, within the town center area, the Wildwood application of its required neighborhood design standards. But you wanted to go into all of the specifics on here and put ADA in there as well.
Well, in terms of housing isn't federally funded, let's say through FHA or things along those lines. There are requirements for rentals, as I've been told, but individual privately owned single family dwellings do not have to necessarily be accessible. And we, as the city, don't review them from an architectural standpoint either. Any type of house you want, as long as the private restrictions, the indentures allow. But on commercial, institutional, public projects, yes, we believe accessibility is key, and then the events we provide, we work very hard at. Most recent master plan that Dr. Rambo and others worked on for Park, we ended up creating 2 accessible trails in areas that could accommodate it. The other part of the site, those trails are nowhere near accessible, but what it means is everybody can come to the park and access the beauty of it. So, good point.
As well as all of the digital things that are coming up for blind and low vision. And, just like in the city hall, most of the time, more than half the time, the elevator isn't working. So things like that are, as a goal, be really nice.
Yes.
Yeah, I don't know if this fits in here anywhere, Joe, but when we've been talking about quality of life, one of those were asking developers to put in soundproofing with insulation and certain types of glass. So I don't know if that would fit in here.
I think that's a great planning goal or objective or policy, depending on how we all want to approach it. So real briefly, if I can build on that. So we, years ago, 3 or 4 maybe, we engaged a consultant to basically study the Route 100, Route 109 corridors for sound. And what we found is that there are sound issues, and the closer you live, you are to those 2 corridors. The recommendations were difficult. One was don't allow development of residential properties within 300-400 feet of those corridors. That's a taking, plain and simple. We had to buy the property to achieve that. So what we ended up coming with the assistance of the mayor and city council, and in many regards, particularly, we asked the developer of the newest project at Route 100, Route 109, to increase insulation, soundproofing in the walls and in the windows and in the doors, the openings, so that although we may not be able to control noise, we may be able to control how it impacts those people that are in proximity. So good idea.
And the developer, I was very accommodating and had a good discussion with us. And through our meetings, then they agreed to that concept.
So, and it started with our planning and zoning commission. We recommended it, so a lot of good thoughts. So accessibility.
One more thought I just had, last winter we learned that we didn't have a snow removal policy or snow removal. Yeah, I think it was the policy. We didn't have something set up. Should we have something like consider preventative maintenance schedules for things like the snow removal and the, I don't know how to put it all together, but infrastructure maintenance, things like that.
Mr. Brown, if you're there, I think the Board of Public Safety is doing something exactly like that.
We
Oh,
approve.
there he is.
So, well, Administration and Public Works Committee has kind of brushed on this more recently, the issue of snow removal on sidewalks. But nothing's really moved forward at this point in time, but we did talk about it. It has come up in the past on occasion. And, what is the city's responsibility? What is a homeowner's responsibility for snow removal on sidewalks? What's a business owner's responsibility, if any, for snow removal on sidewalks adjacent to their business?
Would there be objection on the part of the group that we kind of tackle that under transportation, because we'll be talking about roads, bridges, sidewalks, pedestrian facilities. Sounds.
Yeah, that specific one, but I guess I'm thinking more overall with preventative maintenance schedules on, I guess road and bridges would be under that too, but like the building that we have kind of overlooked for a while, and now it's a major problem, things like that. Can we include that in? Where would we include that?
Actually, I think it's best home for that, maybe community services, because we talk about the role of the city in many aspects of how we privatize most of our services relative to infrastructure, parking, etc. So let me take a look at, if there's no objection on the group, maybe I'll take a look at community services, which is the next element of study, and something into that so we can have a further discussion.
I was just feeding off of what David said about, the soundproofing, sound abatement, things like that. Have there been any discussions on, you know, along Highway 100, have some kind of, you know, tree or bush planting to try to, as part of the development, they should be putting that in there too, because I know, you said put 400 feet from a roadway, but like the topography in villages at Brightleaf, that noise just comes right down into, my street, so I can hear, which is awesome, I can hear the music from up here pretty
too.
well during the concerts, but, the roadway noise is, pretty loud still.
We do. After the conclusion of the study by the sound consultant, we set aside this year $40,000 for a pilot program to see what we could do along a section of Route 100 where the the levels of sound are above both EPA, AASHTO, and can't remember the other station. So we have money set aside. We're going to see if we can do something, if it's workable. If it works, then we'll.
Yeah, so I mean, having it as part of this, or, if it does fit more into, like you said, with the, road and construction piece of the plan. But it'd be nice to have that kind of mentioned at least.
Yeah.
I know there was quite a bit of discussion about sound and the development on the St. Luke's property was going in. And I think that's where we got the developer to increase the insulation and use sound. First question is, I can't remember, did we discuss sound walls?
Yeah, we did.
Rick can kind of talk. Route 109 was improved. Roundabouts at Pine Grover Parkway, section of Route 100. The state did do an analysis, or consultant working with the state, the city did do an analysis, and it didn't meet the standards. Rick, do you want to comment?
Sure, Joe. I mean, it's from the perspective of that project, MoDOT, when you are adding capacity to a roadway, and that's what we were doing on the 109 project originally. This is when we added lanes, went from 2 lanes to 4 lanes. From that section from Clayton to Route 100, they require you to consider noise impacts and other environmental impacts as well. But on that study, it's part of that project, because again, it had federal funds attached to it. A noise study was done to look at the impact of the additional lane, the additional capacity that was added, and the additional traffic that would be added to the road now and into the future, because you actually look at a 20-year horizon, and you have to estimate the noise levels of the properties adjacent to the roadway, the sensitive noise receivers, and then make a determination if it's great enough that you should try to mitigate for that. So that is done on highway projects. It has been done for some while, or it is a requirement of highway projects that are federally funded, has been that way for some time. But in the case of the 109 project, there was ultimately a decision made not to add sound barriers, because quite frankly, they are challenging to implement in an area like Wildwood. They may be very beneficial to the adjacent property owner, but they are challenging to implement. They're costly to implement. They're a huge eyesore in the eyes of many, or most probably, quite frankly. And so they're difficult to, they're just not real practical in a suburban environment like Wildwood, frankly.
The second part then is what's the development that's just west of 109? They're like townhomes, or I think it's a McBride or a McKelvey project. They'll build those.
You're talking about the one on the corner there?
Yeah.
Towns at Windrush?
Windsor Crest.
Windsor Crest.
Okay. Do those people have sound problems?
They may well have, but I've not talked to anyone. No one's called the department, or at least talked to me and complained about the noise. Noise issue. Remember back then, Route 109 was just a 2-lane.
Yeah.
And so from that perspective, it was a little different circumstance. And for the purposes of the town center process, that was to be a large commercial center. So a lot of people, when proposed residential there, they were glad to, I guess, glad to see it.
Yeah, I think the whole issue of noise, I mean, when there is a significant change that has occurred, I do think that it is worth exploring options to see how we can mitigate the noise, but as a comment was made before that, you know, it would be really feasible to do that for all of Wildwood. I think you also have to, there's an accountability and responsibility of the people that made the decision to move next to a major road, just like people who made a decision to move next to an airport. I mean, you're gonna expect to hear noise, and if that's a concern when you're shopping, well, then I think that's when people rule out buying near a highway or a major road. And that would be my case. I would not buy next to a major road if I didn't want to hear the noise. So I think that if there, so I think there's a lot of times where there's an understanding that that's been there since before they even moved in, you know, that road. But there are situations where if there is a significant disturbance or something, then yes, we can look at it to mitigate it. But so no, I don't think that there is a perfect solution to solve the noise problem. There are things that can be done to reduce it, mitigate it, but it's very expensive. And so, you know, just like someone who would buy a home next to a creek, if you know there's a history of flooding, and that's a risk that you're going to take. And so I think we have to remember that there is a certain level of accountability and responsibility on the individual.
On planning and zoning, one of the things I noticed that the city does is that they do quite a bit of when somebody comes in asking the builder, these are the things that we see. And the only reason I know that is because I happened to be around when they were talking about the Hidden Valley, and they had a sound study guy come in, and it was just absolutely fascinating. I'm kind of a little bit of a nerd. I like to learn. And one of the things this guy said was when you plant things like grasses where there's more small leaves, that it dissipates the sound, right? And that if you build a wall, a sound wall, that it actually just protects that house that's right up against the wall, but then it dumps the sound another block over. So I will say, you know, I'm already a fan of the department, but I will say that they do a pretty good job, I think, of asking the builders to address that, like they did at 109 and 100. So I just thought I would put that out there.
There you go, Travis.
Yeah, so as far as sound mitigation goes, no one is suggesting a wall. That's just not part of the conversation. But we did find out from our experts that if you do a berm and you plant trees on top of it, that helps mitigate the sound. Or if you just do a line or two lines of trees, that helps mitigate the sound. And that's something that is not that expensive. And if you live up and down 109 and 100, when the city was like in 1996 or so, there wasn't any noise. It was a one-lane road, and there were woods and tree lines and all things that helped mitigate that sound. But then as they expanded the road, they put the roundabouts in, and then more people moved in, you know, that increased the sound. So I don't think it's right to say, or appropriate to say, that you should be aware if you move near a highway that you're gonna have exponential sound. Because when a lot of those subdivisions were put in, that wasn't the case, and they kind of got caught in between. Now, I agree with you, don't move, you should know better than to build up against a creek. I understand that, that's just, I think, pretty much common knowledge. But when you move into somewhere and it's quiet and country-like and country road, and then all of a sudden, it's not that way anymore. And it does bring noise. I know Canberry Place complains about the noise. People who live close to a roundabout complain about the noise, and that was part of the study. The sound is louder around a roundabout. So I don't think you can just say, well, they moved there, so sorry, because was not like it was when they moved there.
But yeah, what I would just say to counter that is, at the time, there was a mall that was planned to be built there by St. Louis County. So whatever's there today is 100 times better than before what Wildwood.
Oh, sure, they wanted to do a loop around Pond Grover Loop and make it look more like Chesterfield with overpasses and all those kinds of things.
And that's,
And thank God that didn't happen.
I had a conversation, sorry for a second, but I think this will be entertaining. I had a conversation with a resident that had said that they had been at a location before it was, a location here before it was Wildwood. And so I said, so you moved here. 3-acre rule didn't exist. St. Louis County was building like crazy back then. So that's what you moved in under those conditions. It's Wildwood that actually brought the protections in place. And so, I think the incorporation helped a lot, but I think, I don't know how you can say that it was supposed to be protected when there was nothing then back then to protect it. St. Louis County was obviously building away and would have probably continued, and that was going on around in a lot of the neighborhoods there. So sometimes, it's like, oh, well, this was supposed to be protected. I'm like, no, that rule didn't exist.
Well,
Yeah, look at Times Beach and look for that guy that dumped stuff.
Russell Bliss.
And got out, and nothing happened to him. I mean, he dumped the stuff.
So just as a point of reference, on day one of the city of Wildwood, September 1st, there were 2,600 lots that had been approved within about 18-month period prior to the incorporation. That was the legacy we all started with. So a lot of development that we had to accept and make the best of.
So it's 8:17.
Sorry.
Great discussion, but are we at a point to where we can freeze these goals and objectives for this meeting?
Was there a second on your motion?
Not yet.
Second.
What was the motion?
To approve them as, with all the changes, et cetera.
So yes.
I thought so too. I wasn't sure. if
There
I had
wasn't
any.
a second, so, okay. Voice vote of payment money.
Again, the motion and be clear because we want to get it. Motion is to approve the goals and objectives as has been discussed with the changes incorporated as recommended by.
Yes.
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 Voice vote, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Travis, do we have any public comment?
Mr. Chair, the only people on Zoom are those members of the group. So no.
Okay. Mr. Mayor, you were tied up in the beginning. Is there anything you would like to close with?
I'll be brief so that we can get everybody a chance to go home. Well, thank you just again for your service. And I think that, this was a good, effort tonight, making progress through the list here. So let's keep at it because we've got a lot to cover and that Joe wants to get it all done by a certain date. So we're gonna work to do that. But, this is a process that, it's open to. So if anybody's got any ideas, please feel free to share. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
We might have to.
But I'm not leaving.
It's going to trip you.
Again, as I mentioned, if you have comments on
Yeah, you said all
the
in-
directive, environmental, please send them to Melanie and Travis. You have their emails, we'll incorporate them and have them back to you in September. And Mr. Mayor and Chief Royal, we'd like to make an announcement about our new fire chief with Metro West.
Well, I can only speak to, and I actually do know the fire chief, the new fire chief, Brad Shelton. Very fortunate that he lives in my neighborhood, so actually a couple doors down. So if you need some city or you have a fire issue, you get it taken care of on the same street. said that's kind of coincidence, but anyway, he is someone that I think's been ready to step into that role. I know he's been part of the department for many years, ever since I probably moved there, so, well, you probably have more to say.
Just, Brad will do a great job. We're very fortunate to have a good organization there, and they had a lot of talent internally to continue. But yeah, it's unique that you have, with equidistance from you, 3 fire chiefs.
Yeah, you're on that, yeah, you're on there
So
too.
it, but he'll do a great job. He'll get up to speed quickly. He's been on board for a long time, so, yeah. Been with the district 25 years at least, I think, yeah, that's good. He's just turned 50 years old this weekend, I know, so it's like,
We have a new fire chief.
he's a good man.
Next meeting, September 9th. Okay, and we will get into policies where we left off tonight, Vicky.
So can I just get a little bit of clarity? We have finished all of the environmental except for the narrative. Is that the only one that we've completed?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, and do you guys have that, the changes that we all voted for, do you have that all typed up already?
Yes, ma'am.
Could I request that you email that to us just so we could look it over? Or would you rather wait till the end? I don't want to add to your plate, I really don't.
Be glad to, the sooner you have it, the more you can review it, the better off we are. So yes, I'll send it out tomorrow.
Okay, thank you very much.
Have a motion to close. For a second.
Aye.
Meeting adjourned. Thank you.
All right.